The rope creaked against the wooden beam in the hot morning breeze. A crowd had gathered in Copper Springs' dusty square, their faces hard as the Arizona landscape. At the center stood a copper-skinned man, wrists bound, a noose around his neck. His bruised face remained defiant, refusing to plead. Mason Caldwell watched from the shadows, weathered hand clutching a half-empty whiskey bottle. At 39, his face carried lines too deep for his years, eyes that had seen too much and forgiven too little. Sheriff Dawson read the charges: espionage, providing intelligence to Apache forces, conspiring against American citizens. Two Hawks lifted his chin, eyes finding Mason's for a brief moment. I died today, but my blood calls to the blood of my people. The land remembers what men forget. The wagon lurched forward. Mason turned away, unable to watch. The soft crack and the crowd's collective inhale told him it was done. He mounted his horse and rode out of town without looking back. The desert stretched before him, as empty as the hollow space inside his chest. Mason rode hard, as if trying to outrun the memories that never stopped haunting him. His small ranch lay several hours from town, far enough to keep the world at bay. 5 years earlier, Mason had been the Army's best scout. His knowledge of Apache territory had made him invaluable to the military campaign. Until the White Rock Canyon incident changed everything. The memory surfaced like a half-drowned corpse. Mason had provided intelligence about an Apache camp, expressing concerns that women and children might be present. Captain Hargrove had dismissed his concerns, insisting it was a war party. The result? 23 dead Apache, 16 women and children among them. No weapons cache, no stolen goods, just families caught unaware in the pre-dawn darkness. Hargrove had remained unmoved by the carnage. Casualties happen in war, Caldwell. Besides, it'll help clear this territory for the railroad. Progress demands sacrifice. Mason had resigned that day, walking away from the only life he'd known. But walking away hadn't silenced the voices or erased the faces that visited his dreams, especially the little girl with solemn eyes who never spoke, just watched him with a gaze that pierced his soul. As his ranch came into view, a small adobe house nestled against rust-colored hills, Mason noticed dark clouds gathering. A dust storm was brewing. He secured the animals and battened down the shutters. He was checking the last window when he noticed smoke rising from a canyon about a mile east. Mason secured his bandana over his face and rode toward it, the wind growing stronger with each passing minute. What he found in the small box canyon stopped him cold. A wagon lay overturned and partially burned. Two bodies, a white trader and a Mexican laborer, lay sprawled nearby, their flesh blackening. But it was the third figure that caught Mason's attention. A woman dressed in a blend of Apache garments and white woman's clothing was bound to one of the wagon wheels, her leg trapped beneath the broken axle. Her eyes snapped open as he knelt beside her, dark, fierce eyes that held no fear, only defiance and hatred. "Kill me," she whispered in perfect English, "like your people killed all the others." Mason stilled, surprised at her fluency. "I'm not here to kill anyone. Storm's coming. Need to get you out of here." He cut the ropes binding her wrists and lifted the wheel enough for her to pull free. She gasped in pain, but made no other sound, her jaw clenched tight against any display of weakness. "Can you stand?" he asked. She tried, but her injured leg buckled. The wind was picking up rapidly. "No time for pride," Mason said. "Storm will kill us both." Without waiting for permission, he scooped her into his arms. As he lifted her, her sleeve slipped back, revealing a small tattoo, the symbol of the Mescalero Apache band that had camped at White Rock Canyon 5 years ago. The band his information had helped destroy. For a moment, he nearly set her down, a superstitious dread gripping him. But the howling wind made the decision for him. They rode through the growing storm, sand stinging their exposed skin, the world reduced to a brown haze. By the time they reached his ranch, the storm was in full fury. Mason deposited the woman on his bed and lit the oil lamp. She was perhaps 30, with high cheekbones and obsidian eyes. Her black hair, though dirty and matted with blood, fell past her shoulders. She wore a strange mix of clothing, a calico blouse, a traditional Apache skirt, and leather moccasins. "Need to clean those wounds," Mason said, fetching water and medical supplies. "Why bother? I'm already dead, just slower than my companions." "Not if I can help it." "And why would you help an Apache?" she challenged. Mason didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Maybe I've seen enough death. He worked methodically, cleaning her wounds. She had been beaten severely. Bruises darkened her arms and face. Throughout his ministrations, she remained silent, watching him. Only when he touched her injured leg did she flinch slightly. Outside, the storm raged, sand battering the shuttered windows like malevolent spirits seeking entry. "You have a fever," he said, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. She closed her eyes briefly at the touch, the first sign of vulnerability. "What's your name?" Mason asked. She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "The white men at the school called me Kira. My people call me Speaks with Two Voices." Two voices? One for each world I walk between, neither fully accepting me. A bitter smile touched her lips. "And you?" Mason Caldwell." Recognition flashed in her eyes so quickly he might have imagined it, but it sent a chill down his spine nonetheless. "Rest now," he said. "Storm will last through the night." She tried to sit up. "I cannot stay. It is dangerous for you and for me. More dangerous out there right now. Besides, you can barely walk." "I don't need to be carried," she insisted. "I can stand on my own." To prove her point, she pulled herself to her feet, swaying but standing. Her eyes met his, challenging him to doubt her strength. Mason felt something shift inside him, a reluctant admiration for her stubborn pride. "Never said you couldn't," he acknowledged, "but sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's just good sense." She held his gaze a moment longer, then lowered herself back to sit on the edge of the bed, conceding to practical necessity without surrendering her dignity. "I will stay until the storm passes," she said, "no longer." Night deepened, and Mason dozed fitfully in his chair. Kira had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her breathing shallow, her skin burning with fever. During one moment when he bent to replace the cool cloth on her forehead, she grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her eyes flying open but seeing something far away. "Ta Jesus," she murmured in Apache. "Nake nahai taji." Mason recognized the words for dead and two moons. She continued speaking rapidly, switching between English and Apache, fragments about betrayal, blood, and vengeance. Then she said something that froze his blood. The canyon ran red. The children screamed. "I wasn't there. I should have been there." White Rock Canyon. She was talking about the massacre. His massacre. Mason backed away, his heart pounding. How much did she know? Had she recognized him? Later, he woke to find her staring at him from across the room. "You were talking in your sleep," she said, her voice stronger now. "Was I?" "You said Apache names. You spoke of White Rock Canyon." Mason's mouth went dry. "Were you there?" The direct question hung in the air between them. "I was the scout," he said finally. "I provided the location, but I didn't know." He stopped, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. "You knew who I was from the beginning," he said. She nodded. "Your name is known among my people, the White Scout who led death to White Rock." "Then why come with me? Why accept my help?" "Because I had no choice, and because I, too, know what it is to betray one's people." A violent gust of wind rattled the shutters. When it passed, the silence was sudden and complete. "Storm's eye," Mason said, opening a shutter. Outside, the world was eerily still. Through an opening in the storm clouds, stars shone with fierce clarity. "The stars," he said. "Apache used them for navigation, same as white men." "Different stars, different meanings," she replied. "My people follow the path of the eagle and the water monster. My father taught me to find north by the pole star, said as long as you could see it, you were never truly lost." "Were you lost?" "For a time, maybe still am." "After White Rock?" she asked. He nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "I was not there," Kira said softly. "I was at the government school. When I returned 2 moons later, there was nothing left but graves and silence." "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the words were inadequate. "Sorry does not return the dead to life." "No, it doesn't." Mason ran a hand through his graying hair. "Why were you bound to that wagon?" "They were taking me to Fort Benton, to hand me over to Captain Hargrove. I was to be executed as a "Hargrove?" Mason's attention sharpened. "Edgar Hargrove?" "The same man who ordered the White Rock attack." He has risen in rank since then. And you're accused of spying against the army? I am accused of many things, some true, some false. What will you do now, he asked. Find my father, she said. Warn him of what comes. And what is coming? Another White Rock, another massacre. Hargrove has plans for the land where my people now camp. He will create a reason to attack, as he did before. Mason felt sick. 5 years and nothing had changed. Your father, he leads your band? Kira nodded. Wayfinder is chief now. He is a wise man, but even he may not be able to prevent what comes unless he is warned in time. The wind suddenly picked up again. The storm's eye had passed. Why help me? She asked again. After all that lies between your people and mine. Maybe because we've both been used by the same men, Mason replied. Maybe because I'm tired of being on the wrong side of the truth. In his dreams, they came to him, the dead of White Rock Canyon. Silent figures moving through mist, faces indistinct except for their eyes. But tonight was different. Tonight a small girl approached, no more than 7. Unlike the others, her face was clear. Solemn dark eyes, a small mouth, hair in 2 neat braids. She had been the last one he'd seen as he'd ridden away from the canyon, watching him with those ancient eyes. In his dreams, she never spoke. But tonight she raised her hand and pointed east. Shiaj, she said. My child. Mason woke with a gaping heart hammering. Dawn was breaking, pale light seeping through the shutters. The storm had passed, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. Kira was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed. The ghost found you in your sleep, she said. Mason nodded. They always do. My people believe dreams are messages from the spirit world. What did they tell you? A child pointed east. She spoke for the first time. Said Shiaz, my child. You speak Apache? Enough to get by. The child in your dream, was she from White Rock? Mason nodded. And you saw her there? In reality? Yes, after the attack. Standing among the... He couldn't finish. Did you report her to your commanders? Mason shook his head. No, went back later to look for her, but she was gone. Kira's face gave nothing away, but something in her posture changed, a subtle relaxation. I need to leave, she said. The storm has passed. Your leg will bear my weight. I've endured worse. Mason knew better than to argue. At least eat something first, and let me give you supplies. They shared a simple breakfast. Mason gathered supplies, water, food, a small knife, while Kira fashioned a walking stick. The men who were taking you to Fort Benton, Mason said. What happened to them? Apache raiders attacked the wagon. I was fortunate they did not see me as valuable enough to take. And now you'll find your father? She nodded. If I can reach him in time. The army will be looking for you. I am aware of the risks. Mason ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. Everything in him said to let her go, yet something else, guilt, perhaps, or justice, pushed him to do more. I'll go into town, he heard himself saying. Gather information, find out what Hargrove is planning. Why would you do that? Because if he's planning another White Rock, I need to know. You need to what? Ease your conscience? Save your soul? There was no mockery in her tone, only curiosity. Maybe, Mason admitted. Or maybe just do what's right for once. Kira studied him for a long moment. I will be at Split Rock Canyon by sundown. If you learn anything of value, find me there. With that, she left, a solitary figure moving with painful determination across the desert. Only after she disappeared did Mason realize she had never thanked him for saving her life. And strangely, he was glad of it. Copper Springs was quiet in the aftermath of the dust storm. Mason tied his horse outside the Broken Spoke Saloon and stepped inside. In a far corner, he spotted 3 soldiers from Fort Benton deep in conversation. One was Sergeant Frank Cooper, a decent man as soldiers went. The other 2 were younger, probably new recruits. Keeping his head down, Mason positioned himself to overhear their conversation. Sweep of the eastern canyons tomorrow, Cooper was saying, his finger tracing a route on a map. Captain's orders are to check every cave, every ravine. She can't have gone far, not on foot. What about the Apache band camped at Three Sisters Mesa? One of the younger soldiers asked. Cooper shook his head. Too obvious. Besides, that band is on the move, heading southeast. Weird timing, commented the third soldier. Almost like they know something's coming. They always know, Cooper said grimly. Question is, what are they planning to do about it? Captain Hargrove says they're gathering for an attack on Broken Creek, the young soldier said, lowering his voice. Says this spy was coordinating with them, passing army information. Cooper's expression was skeptical. That's what he says. You don't believe it, Sarge? What I believe doesn't matter. Orders are orders, but things don't add up. This Apache woman was a translator for the Army for 2 years. If she was spying, why wait until now? And why would she head toward Fort Benton if she'd just betrayed them? Mason took a small sip of his whiskey, mind racing. So Hargrove was claiming Kira was a spy, and her people were on the move, perhaps already sensing danger. The saloon doors swung open and 2 men entered. The first was tall and imposing in his army captain's uniform, with cold blue eyes and a precisely trimmed mustache. Edgar Hargrove, looking barely older than when Mason had last seen him. The second man was a civilian, expensively dressed in a tailored suit. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and commanding, with the confident bearing of wealth and influence. The saloon quieted as they approached the soldiers' table. At ease, gentlemen, Hargrove said. Mr. Blackwood and I were just discussing the security situation. Yes, sir, Cooper replied. Roads are still being cleared. We plan to resume at dawn tomorrow. Excellent. Mr. Blackwood is very concerned about the Apache threat, particularly given his investment in the region. The civilian, Blackwood, nodded solemnly. The railroad spur to the mines can't proceed with the hostiles in the area. The investors in Boston are growing nervous about the delays. I've allocated additional men to the search for the spy, Hargrove continued, and I've sent word to Colonel Forrester at Fort Apache requesting reinforcements for the operation against the hostiles at Three Sisters. When do you expect to move on them? Blackwood asked. 3 days, perhaps 4. Depends on how quickly Forrester can deploy men. I want overwhelming force. Make an example of them so the other bands understand resistance is futile. Mason felt a chill run down his spine. Hargrove wasn't just planning an attack. He was planning a slaughter and making no effort to hide his true motives. As Mason rose to leave, his eyes met Cooper's across the room. Recognition flickered in the sergeant's gaze, but Cooper simply gave an almost imperceptible nod and returned his attention to his commanding officer. Mason found Kira resting in the shadow of Split Rock Canyon's distinctive formation. A massive boulder split cleanly down the middle. She looked up as he approached. You came, she said. Said I would. Many men say many things. I'm not many men, he replied, and I heard things you need to know. He told her about the conversation, Hargrove's claims about her being a spy, the planned attack on her people, Blackwood and his railroad interests. Everything I told you was true, she said. Hargrove plans another massacre for the same reason as before. Greed disguised as security. Your people are moving. Cooper mentioned it. My father has the gift of foreseeing danger, but they won't go far enough, fast enough. Hargrove will find them. Unless they're warned. Kira's gaze snapped to his face, searching. And who will warn them? You? The challenge in her voice was clear, but there was something else beneath it. A test, perhaps, or the barest hint of hope. Yes, he said, if you'll take me to them. Why should I trust you? Why should my people? They shouldn't, Mason admitted. I haven't earned that trust. But Hargrove is moving in 3 days. They need to know exactly what's coming. And what do you gain from this, Mason Caldwell? Nothing, he said finally. And everything. Kira seemed to understand the paradox. There is something I must show you first. She reached into her pouch and withdrew an object wrapped in deerskin. Carefully unwinding it, she revealed a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Mason took it and unfolded it. It was a map showing the territory around Three Sisters Mesa, with certain areas marked. One location was circled repeatedly, with the words, primary deposit, written beside it. A mining survey map, he said. Gold? Copper and silver primarily. This map shows mineral deposits on traditional Apache lands, lands protected by treaty until valuable minerals were discovered. Mason studied the date in the corner, 1873, 5 years ago, just before White Rock. This is why, he said, the realization dawning, White Rock wasn't just about clearing land for the railroad. It was about these deposits. Kira nodded grimly. The railroad is merely a means to access the minerals. Blackwood knew about these deposits before the first survey team officially discovered them. They needed the Apache removed. How did you get this? I worked as a translator at Fort Benton. I found this map in Hargrove's office and took it as evidence. When he discovered it missing, he accused me of spying. Which wasn't entirely untrue, Mason noted. Not as an accusation, but an observation. No, Kira admitted. I was gathering information to protect my people. This is worth killing for. To them, at least. It is worth dying for to me. This map proves the treaty violations. It proves the massacres were about wealth, not security. Will it stop them, if people knew? Kira's laugh was bitter. People already know, Mason. Those who could stop it simply choose not to see. She was right. The truth alone wasn't enough to stop men like Hargrove and Blackwood. But it was a start. We should go, Mason said. If your people are moving southeast, we need to catch up before dark. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon when Kira signaled for them to stop. They had been following a dry riverbed, the tracks of many people visible in the sand. We're close, she said, pointing to a thin wisp of smoke barely visible against the darkening sky. How will they receive us? Me, with relief. You, she hesitated. They will not kill you immediately. Comforting, Mason said dryly. My father is a wise man. He will listen before he judges. But be prepared. There are younger warriors who may be less patient. They rode over the ridge and down into a small, sheltered valley where the band had made camp. About 30 people moved about, setting up wickiups, tending fires, and caring for horses. Is this all that remains of your band? Mason asked quietly. Kira nodded. After White Rock, many joined other bands for protection. Others died of sickness or hunger when we were forced from our hunting grounds. We are few now, but stubborn. An older man emerged from one of the wickiups, his long gray hair bound with a red cloth, his face deeply lined, but his posture straight. Wayfinder, Kira said. Shizeye, my father. The chief raised his hand and the warriors who had been moving toward them stopped. Kira approached her father, limping but walking unaided. They spoke rapidly in Apache. My father will speak with us, she said. Come. Mason followed her to the central fire, where Wayfinder had seated himself. My daughter tells me you saved her life, Wayfinder said in clear English. That surprised Mason. She also says you wish to warn us of a new threat. Yes, Mason replied. Captain Hargrove plans to attack your people within 4 days. He claims you are preparing to raid settlements, but the truth is he wants your land for mining and a railroad. And how do you know this? I overheard him speaking with a man named Blackwood in Copper Springs. And why do you bring this warning? You who once led soldiers to kill my people. The direct accusation hung in the air. Mason felt the weight of every eye in the camp. Because I was wrong then, he said simply. Because I don't want more innocent blood on my hands. Because it's the right thing to do. Wayfinder studied him intently. My daughter believes you speak truth. She says the ghosts of White Rock visit your dreams. They do. The child who points east, Wayfinder continued. She has a message for you. Mason felt a chill. How do you know about that? I have seen her too, in my own dream visions. The spirits speak to those who listen. Wayfinder turned to address his people in Apache. When he finished, there was a burst of discussion. One young man spoke passionately, frequently gesturing toward Mason with obvious hostility. Black Knife wishes to kill you now, Kira translated quietly. He lost his mother and sisters at White Rock. Wayfinder raised his hand, silencing the discussion. He spoke again, his voice carrying authority that needed no translation. My people have questions, he said to Mason. How many soldiers? What weapons? When exactly will they come? Mason shared what he knew. 40 men from Fort Benton, potentially 60 more from Fort Apache, rifles, possibly a small cannon, approaching from the north in 3 to 4 days. We are 32 souls with 11 warriors who can fight, Wayfinder said. We cannot defeat 100 soldiers in open battle. You need to move further south into the mountains where they can't easily follow. And then what? Kira interjected. Move again when they follow, and again after that, until there is nowhere left to go? Her words hung in the air, the bitter truth behind them undeniable. Wayfinder sighed, suddenly looking every year of his age. My daughter speaks truth. Running buys time, not safety. Then what will you do? Mason asked. The chief was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving from Mason to Kira. We will seek justice, he said. The map my daughter took proves the treaty violations. If the right people see it, perhaps not all white men will support Hargrove's plans. The right people? Mason was skeptical. Colonel James Forrester commands Fort Apache. He is a hard man but an honest one. He fought us fairly in the past and has kept his word. If he sees this evidence, he might refuse Hargrove's request for reinforcements. It's a risk, Mason said. Forrester might just arrest whoever brings him the map. All paths now hold risk, Wayfinder replied, but I have dreamed of this man. The spirits show him standing at a crossroads. Mason wasn't sure what to make of Wayfinder's dream visions, but he respected the chief's conviction. How would you get the map to him? Any Apache approaching the fort would be shot on sight. I cannot go, Wayfinder agreed, nor can any of my warriors. His gaze shifted to Kira, and understanding dawned on Mason. You want her to go? He asked incredulously. She's injured and the army is hunting her as a spy. I have endured worse, Kira said, and I know the fort, its routines. It's suicide. It is necessary, she replied simply. Mason looked between father and daughter, seeing the same stubborn determination in both faces. Then I'll go with you, he said. Kira's eyes widened slightly. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. Wayfinder nodded once. The spirits chose well when they sent you to my daughter's aid. The chief rose, signaling an end to the council. Rest tonight, your journey begins at dawn. As they walked toward the cooking fires, Mason felt the hostile stares of many in the camp, particularly Black Knife. But he also noticed that some of the older members regarded him with cautious curiosity rather than hatred. Your father, he said quietly to Kira. How did he learn such perfect English? Like me, he spent time in the white man's world. He was taken to a mission school as a boy. Later, he worked as a scout for the army, before they betrayed him too. Seems we've all been used and discarded by the same masters. Perhaps that is why the spirits have drawn us together, Kira suggested. 3 betrayed souls seeking redemption. As night deepened around them, Mason found himself studying Kira's face in the firelight. Despite her injuries, despite the danger facing her people, there was a serenity to her that he envied, a centeredness that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she stood for. You should sleep, she told him. The journey to Fort Apache is hard, even for those not being hunted. Mason nodded, stretching out beside the fire, but as he closed his eyes, he wondered if sleep would come or if the ghosts of White Rock would visit him again, this time with new messages, new directions for the path he had chosen. Either way, he was ready to listen. The southeastern horizon, Mason felt the weight of the decision he had just made. He was committing himself not just to warning Kira's people, but to opposing Hargrove, to actively working against the army he had once served, against men he had once called brothers. Yet strangely, the weight felt right, as if he were finally shouldering a burden he should have carried all along. The ghosts of White Rock would never leave him, but perhaps they might find some peace in his efforts to prevent history from repeating itself. Beside him, Kira sat straight and proud despite her injuries, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Mason wondered what it cost her to accept his help, to trust even partially the man who had played a role in destroying her people. Her strength humbled him, making his own struggles seem small by comparison. Together they rode deeper into the desert, 2 unlikely allies bound by shared guilt and common purpose, neither fully knowing what awaited them beyond the next rise. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, when Kira signaled for them to stop. They had been following a dry riverbed for several miles, the tracks of many horses and people clearly visible in the sand. We're close, she said, pointing to a thin wisp of smoke barely visible against the darkening sky. Just over that ridge. Mason nodded, suddenly aware of the enormity of what they were about to do. How will they receive us? Me, with relief and welcome, Kira replied. You, she hesitated. They will not kill you immediately if that's your concern. Comforting, Mason said dryly. My father is a wise man, she continued. He will listen before he judges. But be prepared. There are younger warriors who may be less patient. Mason understood the warning. He had no illusions about how he would be viewed by the Apache. To them, he was the enemy, the betrayer, regardless of his current intentions. They rode slowly over the ridge and down into a small, sheltered valley where the band had made camp. About 30 people, men, women, and children, moved about the camp, setting up wickiups, tending fires, and caring for horrors. It was a small group, far smaller than Mason had expected. "Is this all that remains of your band?" he asked quietly. Kira nodded, her expression somber. After White Rock, many joined other bands for protection. Others died of sickness or hunger when we were forced from our traditional hunting grounds. We are few now, but stubborn. Their approach had been noticed. Several men reached for weapons, and women hurried children toward the center of the camp. An older man emerged from one of the wickiups, his long gray hair bound with a red cloth, his face deeply lined, but his posture straight and commanding. "Wayfinder," Kira said. "Shije-a, my father." The chief raised his hand, and the warriors who had been moving toward them stopped, though they kept their weapons ready. Kira slid from the horse and approached her father, limping but walking unaided. They spoke rapidly in Apache, too quickly for Mason to follow more than a word or two. Wayfinder's eyes frequently shifted to Mason during the conversation, his expression unreadable. Finally, Kira turned and gestured for Mason to dismount. He did so slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements non-threatening. "My father will speak with us," she said. "Come." Mason followed her to the central fire, where Wayfinder had seated himself. The chief motioned for them to sit across from him. Around them, the camp had grown silent. Everyone watching the unprecedented scene of a white man, and not just any white man, but the infamous scout from White Rock, sitting at their council fire. "My daughter tells me you saved her life," Wayfinder said in clear, precise English that surprised Mason. "She also says you wish to warn us of a new threat." "Yes," Mason replied, equally direct. "Captain Edgar Hargrove plans to attack your people within 4 days. He claims you are preparing to raid settlements, but the truth is he wants your land for mining and a railroad." Wayfinder's weathered face revealed nothing. "And how do you know this?" "I overheard him speaking with a man named Blackwood in Copper Springs. They discussed their plans openly, not expecting any sympathy for Apache in that town. And why do you bring this warning? You who once led soldiers to kill my people." The direct accusation hung in the air. Mason felt the weight of every eye in the camp upon him. "Because I was wrong then," he said simply. "Because I don't want more innocent blood on my hands, because it's the right thing to do." Wayfinder studied him intently as if trying to see into his soul. "My daughter believes you speak truth. She says the ghosts of White Rock visit your dreams." Mason glanced at Kira, surprised she had shared that detail. "They do." "The child who points east," Wayfinder continued. "She has a message for you." Mason felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "How do you know about that?" "I have seen her too," the chief said. "In my own dream visions. The spirits speak to those who listen." Before Mason could ask what he meant, Wayfinder turned to address his people in Apache. Though Mason couldn't understand all the words, the gravity of the chief's tone was clear. He was relating the warning, preparing them for what might come. When he finished, there was a burst of discussion among the warriors. One young man, perhaps in his early 20s, spoke passionately, frequently gesturing toward Mason with obvious hostility. "Black Knife wishes to kill you now," Kira translated quietly. "He lost his mother and sisters at White Rock." Mason nodded, understanding the young man's rage. Wayfinder raised his hand, silencing the discussion. He spoke again, his voice carrying authority that needed no translation. Black Knife and the other warriors subsided, though the young man's glare at Mason didn't diminish. "My people have questions," Wayfinder said, turning back to Mason. "How many soldiers? What weapons? When exactly will they come and from which direction?" "I don't know all the details," Mason admitted. "Hargrove commands about 40 men at Fort Benton. He's requested reinforcements from Fort Apache, maybe another 60. They'll have rifles, possibly a small cannon. As for direction," he paused, considering, "they'll approach from the north following the river. It's the only practical route for a large force." "And when?" 3 days, maybe 4. Depends on how quickly the reinforcements arrive." Wayfinder nodded slowly, absorbing the information. We are 32 souls with 11 warriors who can fight. The rest are women, children, elders. We cannot defeat 100 soldiers in open battle. You need to move, Mason said, further south into the mountains where they can't easily follow. And then what? Kira interjected. Move again when they follow, and again after that, until there is nowhere left to go? Her words hung in the air, the bitter truth behind them undeniable. This was not just about avoiding one attack. It was about survival itself, about the systematic erasure of a people from their land. Wayfinder sighed, suddenly looking every year of his age. My daughter speaks truth. Running buys time, not safety. Then what will you do? Mason asked. The chief was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the flames. Finally, he looked up, his gaze moving from Mason to Kira and back again. We will seek justice, he said, not vengeance, but truth. The map my daughter took, it proves the treaty violations. If the right people see it, perhaps not all white men will support Hargrove's plans. The right people? Mason was skeptical. Who would that be? Colonel James Forrester commands Fort Apache, Wayfinder said. He is a hard man, but an honest one. He fought us fairly in the past and has kept his word when peace was made. If he sees this evidence, he might refuse Hargrove's request for reinforcements. Mason considered this. He had heard of Forrester, a career officer with a reputation for strict adherence to regulations and orders. Whether that would extend to honoring treaty rights was another question entirely. It's a risk, he said finally. Forrester might just arrest whoever brings him the map and proceed with Hargrove's plan anyway. All paths now hold risk, Wayfinder replied. But I have dreamed of this man. The spirits show him standing at a crossroads, facing a choice between two paths. Mason wasn't sure what to make of Wayfinder's dream visions, but he respected the chief's conviction. How would you even get the map to him? Fort Apache is 3 days' ride, and any Apache approaching a fort would be shot on sight. I cannot go, Wayfinder agreed, nor can any of my warriors. His gaze shifted to Kira, and understanding dawned on Mason. You want her to go? He asked incredulously. She's injured, and the army is hunting her as a I have endured worse, Kira said, echoing her words from that morning. And I know the fort, its routines, its weaknesses. It's suicide, Mason argued. It is necessary, she replied simply. Mason looked between father and daughter, seeing the same stubborn determination in both faces. They were willing to risk everything on this desperate gamble, not just Kira's life, but the future of their entire band. Then I'll go with you, he heard himself say. The words surprised even him, but once spoken, he knew they were right. He couldn't let Kira face this alone, not when he had the skills and knowledge that might help her succeed. Kira's eyes widened slightly the first time he had genuinely surprised her. Why would you do that? Mason thought about all the possible answers. Guilt, redemption, justice, maybe even something approaching friendship. In the end, he settled on the simplest truth, because it's the right thing to do. Wayfinder studied him intently, then nodded once as if confirming something he had already known. The spirits chose well when they sent you to my daughter's aid. The chief rose, signaling an end to the council. Rest tonight, eat, prepare. Your journey begins at dawn. As Wayfinder walked away, Mason felt the weight of what he had just committed to settling on his shoulders. He was no longer just warning the Apache. He was actively joining their cause, putting himself between them and the forces he had once served. If they failed, he would be branded a traitor, possibly executed. Yet strangely, the prospect didn't terrify him as it should have. For the first time in 5 years, his path was clear. Whatever came next, success or failure, life or death, at least he would meet it with clear conscience and purpose. Kira touched his arm lightly, drawing his attention back to the present. Come, she said. You should eat and rest. Tomorrow will test us both. As they walked toward the cooking fires, Mason felt the hostile stares of many in the camp, particularly Black Knife. But he also noticed that some of the older members of the band, those who had seen enough of war and lost to value peace, regarded him with cautious curiosity rather than outright hatred. They were given food, a simple stew of rabbit and desert plants, and a place near one of the fires. As they ate, Mason was aware of being both present in the camp and separate from it, included yet apart. Your father, he said quietly to Kira. How did he learn such perfect English? A small, sad smile touched her lips. Like me, he spent time in the white man's world. He was taken to a mission school as a boy. Later, he worked as a scout for the army, before they betrayed him too. The parallel to Mason's own history was not lost on him. Seems we've all been used and discarded by the same masters. Perhaps that is why the spirits have drawn us together, Kira suggested. Three betrayed souls seeking redemption. Mason considered this, finding a certain poetic justice in the idea. Maybe so. As night deepened around them and the camp grew quiet, Mason found himself studying Kira's face in the firelight. Despite her injuries, despite the danger facing her people, there was a serenity to her that he envied, a centeredness that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she stood for. You should sleep, she told him, noticing his gaze. The journey to Fort Apache is hard, even for those not being hunted. Mason nodded, stretching out beside the fire. But as he closed his eyes, he wondered if sleep would come, or if the ghosts of White Rock would visit him again, this time with new messages, new directions for the path he had chosen. Either way, he was ready to listen. Dawn broke over the Apache camp in pale ribbons of light. Mason sat by the dying embers of last night's fire, watching as the band prepared for his and Kira's departure. The night had been restless, filled with whispered council meetings and suspicious glances from younger warriors. Black Knife, in particular, had made his hatred clear, his hand never straying on from the knife at his belt. Wayfinder approached, his weathered face solemn in the early light. The spirits were restless last night, he said, lowering himself beside Mason with the careful movements of age. Your son doesn't want me here, Mason observed. Black Knife is not my son by blood, but by grief. He lost everyone at White Rock. Wayfinder studied Mason's face. You carry White Rock differently, not as hate, but as a stone in your heart. Mason couldn't deny it. Hard to hate others when you hate yourself more. Wayfinder nodded as if Mason had confirmed something. The child in your dreams, she is important. She guides you for a reason. What reason? That is for you to discover. The chief reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew what looked like a bundle of dried herbs tied with sinew. This will help the journey. 3 days to Fort Apache if you ride hard and avoid soldiers. And if we don't avoid them? Wayfinder's eyes held a glint of grim humor. Then the journey will be considerably shorter. Kira approached, dressed for travel. The walking stick was gone, though she still favored her injured leg slightly. She had braided her hair and wore a simple cotton shirt and riding skirt that made her look more like a Mexican trader's daughter than an Apache woman. We should go, she said. The morning scouts report dust to the north. Riders, coming from Fort Benton. Mason rose, nodding to Wayfinder. Thank you for not killing me in my sleep. The night is not over until the sun rises, the chief replied with the same dry humor. Then more seriously, protect my daughter. She carries not just the map, but our future. I will. Wayfinder turned to Kira, speaking softly in Apache. Mason caught only fragments, something about caution, spirits, and trust. Kira responded, touching her father's weathered cheek in a gesture of tenderness that seemed to transcend their stoic facade. 2 horses were brought, Mason's chestnut and a sturdy pinto for Kira. The animals were loaded with minimal supplies, water, pemmican, a small cooking pot, and blankets. Anything more would slow them down. As they mounted, Black Knife approached, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He spoke rapidly to Kira in Apache, gesturing once toward Mason. She responded sharply, her chin lifting in the same proud gesture Mason had seen when she insisted on standing despite her injuries. Black Knife's hand moved to his knife, but Wayfinder's voice cracked across the camp like a whip. The young warrior froze, then slowly stepped back, his eyes never leaving Mason's. What did he say? Mason asked as they rode away from the camp. Kira's face was tight. He said, I dishonor the dead of White Rock by riding with their killer, that when you have served your purpose, he will find you and take your scalp. Friendly. He speaks from pain. His mother and sisters died at White Rock. He was hunting with the men. She looked sideways at Mason. Does his hatred disturb you? No, Mason said honestly. I'd feel the same in his place. They rode in silence for a time, following a narrow game trail that wound through scrub-covered hills, the terrain gradually rising as they headed southeast. The sun climbed higher, baking the land with merciless intensity. By midday, heat shimmered off the rocks, and both horses and riders were coated in fine dust. They stopped in the shade of a sandstone overhang to rest the horses and eat a sparse meal of pemmican. Mason studied their surroundings, the scout in him automatically noting landmarks, possible shelter, escape routes. We're being followed, he said quietly. Kira nodded, unsurprised. Black Knife. I saw his tracks an hour ago. Your father ordered him to follow us? No, he disobeyed. She took a small sip of water. He does not trust you with me, or perhaps he does not trust me with you. Mason considered the implications. Will he interfere? Not unless he believes I am in danger. Her dark eyes met his. Am I in danger, Mason Caldwell? The directness of the question caught him off guard. Not from me, but from others, the soldiers who hunt me, the memories that haunt you. She leaned forward slightly. From the ghosts that visit your dreams? Mason looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. I told you I'd get you to Fort Apache. I keep my word. Yes, she said, settling back. I believe you do, now. The implication that he hadn't always was fair enough. He had once given his word to the Army, had believed in their mission. That oath had led to White Rock. You're English, he said, changing the subject. Where did you learn to speak so well? A shadow passed over her face. The white man's school in Santa Fe, 10 years among the black robes, learning their God, their letters, their ways of thinking. Her mouth twisted. They were very thorough in their teaching. They beat the Apache out of the children and poured in Christianity in its place. But not with you, she smiled thinly. They tried. I was stubborn. Mason could well imagine. The same fierce pride that had made her stand on her injured leg rather than appear weak would have made her a difficult student to break. Is that where you learned to be a translator? She nodded. The Army needed someone who spoke both languages, who understood both worlds. I needed purpose. After White Rock, after learning what had happened to my people while I was away. Her voice had gone flat, emotionless, but Mason sensed the deep pain beneath the surface. You blame yourself, he said, recognizing the pattern, for not being there. I was safe in the school while my people died. She looked at him directly. We are not so different, you and I. Both caught between worlds, both carrying the weight of those we could not save. The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Mason stood, brushing dust from his pants. We should move, cover more ground before dark. Kira rose as well, her expression knowing. She had touched a nerve and was aware of it, but she said nothing more as they mounted and continued their journey. By late afternoon, the terrain had changed, the barren hills giving way to scrub forest of mesquite and juniper. The air was cooler at this elevation, and occasionally they caught glimpses of distant mountains to the east, the range that held Fort Apache. Mason checked the sun's position. They had made good time, despite the need to avoid the main trails where soldiers might patrol. At this pace, they would reach the fort in 3 days, maybe less. A sound made him rein in sharply, a distant crack that echoed through the hills. Rifle shot, Kira said, her body tensing. Mason nodded, already scanning their surroundings. Too far to be aimed at us. Hunting party, maybe, or a patrol. Or both, Kira said grimly. They waited, listening. 2 more shots followed, then silence. Mason calculated the direction. North and west, off their path but not by much. We should find cover for the night, Kira suggested. There is a place ahead, an old shepherd's hut in a box canyon. Good water, hidden from the main trail. Mason raised an eyebrow. You know this territory well. I have traveled between the fort and my people many times. A faint smile touched her lips. Not always with permission. They rode another hour, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The shepherd's hut proved to be little more than 3 crumbling stone walls and half a roof, but it was well hidden in a small canyon with a spring-fed pool at one end. More importantly, it offered only one approach, making it defensible. As they made camp, Mason remained alert for any sign of Black Knife. The young warrior was still following, but had kept his distance throughout the day. Mason wondered if he would approach during the night, perhaps while they slept. He resolved to keep his rifle close. Kira gathered wood for a small fire, moving with quiet efficiency despite her injured leg. She had said little during the afternoon's ride, her thoughts seemingly turned inward. Now, as she knelt to start the fire, she broke her silence. "The child in your dreams," she said without preamble. "Describe her again." Mason paused in unsaddling his horse, surprised by the request. Young, maybe 7, 2 braids, solemn face, dark eyes, never spoke until last night. "And you saw her at White Rock after the attack?" "Yes." The memory was still vivid, haunting. "Standing among the afterward, just watching me. I came back later to look for her, but she was gone." Kira nodded slowly as if confirming something to herself. "In our tradition, spirits attach themselves to those with whom they have unfinished business, sometimes to seek vengeance, sometimes to guide." "And which am I?" Mason asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "That depends on you." She struck a spark to the kindling, nurturing it into a small flame. "On what you do with her guidance." Mason finished with the horses and joined her by the fire, the evening's chill settling around them. "Your father seemed to know about her, about my dream." "My father sees things others do not. The gift runs in our family." She stirred the small fire with a stick. "Some say I have it too. Do you?" She was silent a moment, her face unreadable in the flickering light. "I see fragments, pieces of what might be, not always clearly." "And what do you see now, for us, for this journey?" Her eyes, when she looked up, reflected the flames like black glass. Blood, decision, a crossroads where many paths meet. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran down Mason's spine. "That's not very reassuring." "The future rarely is." She handed him a piece of pemmican. "Eat. You will need your strength." They ate in silence as darkness claimed the canyon. The stars emerged, brilliant in the clear mountain air, a glittering tapestry that seemed close enough to touch. Mason found himself studying Kira's profile as she gazed upward. In this light, with her guard momentarily lowered, she looked younger. The hardness in her features softened to a kind of wistful contemplation. "What do you see in the stars?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprised by the personal question. "The Great Bear, the Water Monster, the Path of Souls." She pointed to different constellations. "My grandmother taught me their stories when I was small, before the school." "What happened to her?" "Your grandmother?" "She died while I was away. A fever." Kira's voice was matter-of-fact, but Mason sensed the old pain beneath the words. "She was the one who named me, speaks with 2 voices. She said it was both blessing and curse to understand 2 worlds." "And which is it for you?" "Both, always both." She drew her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "When I was with the Black Robes, I yearned for my people, our ways. When I returned, I found I had become too white in my thinking to be fully accepted. Then the army, where I was useful but never trusted." "Caught between," Mason said, understanding. She nodded. "Like you, too soft-hearted for a scout, too knowing of the Apache to be comfortable among settlers." Again, her perception unsettled him. She saw too clearly, this woman with the ancient eyes. "Rest," he said, reaching for his rifle. "I'll take first watch." Kira hesitated, then nodded, settling onto her blanket near the fire. "Wake me in 4 hours." Mason positioned himself near the canyon entrance, his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees. From here, he could see both the approach and the camp. The night was quiet except for the occasional call of a coyote and the soft sounds of the horses. His thoughts drifted to the path that had brought him here, from respected scout to hermit to unlikely ally of the very people he had once helped hunt. Life had a strange way of circling back, of offering second chances disguised as new troubles. A slight movement caught his eye, a shadow detaching from deeper shadows near the canyon rim. Black Knife. The young warrior had followed them as expected and now watched their camp from above. Mason could feel the weight of his hatred even at this distance. He considered calling out, acknowledging the watcher, but decided against it. Better to let Black Knife believe himself undetected. For now, the warrior seemed content to observe, perhaps waiting for Mason to make a wrong move, to confirm his suspicions. The hours passed slowly. The fire burned down to embers, casting just enough light to illuminate Kira's sleeping form. Despite her injuries and the hard journey, she slept soundly, her breathing deep and even. Trust or exhaustion? Perhaps both. When it was time, Mason moved quietly to her side, reaching out to touch her shoulder. Before his hand made contact, her eyes opened, instantly alert. "My turn," she said softly, sitting up. Mason nodded, impressed by her awareness even in sleep. "Our friend is still with us, up on the rim." She glanced toward the canyon wall. "I know. He will not interfere unless he believes it necessary." "And what would make it necessary?" "If you tried to harm me, if soldiers found us." She picked up her knife, testing the edge with her thumb. "If you betrayed us to Hargrove." "I won't." She studied him in the dim light. "No," she said finally. "I don't believe you will." Mason settled onto his own blanket, rifle still within reach. Despite his exhaustion, sleep seemed unlikely with Black Knife watching from above. Yet somehow, with Kira's quiet presence keeping guard, he drifted off, his last conscious thought a vague wonder at the strange trust developing between them. His dreams, when they came, were fragmented and disturbing. The little girl appeared again, still pointing eastward, her expression urgent. Behind her, shadows moved. Soldiers, Apache warriors, indistinct figures locked in combat. Blood stained the desert sand. And through it all, a sense of time running out, of forces converging that could not be stopped. He woke with a start, hand already reaching for his rifle. Kira knelt beside him, her fingers pressed against his lips in warning. Dawn was breaking, the canyon filled with pearl gray light. "Riders," she whispered, "coming up the main trail." Mason listened, hearing it now, the distant rhythm of hoofbeats, the jingle of tack. Many horses moving at a steady pace, a patrol, most likely, and a large one. He moved silently to the canyon entrance, Kira close behind. From their sheltered position, they could see a stretch of the main trail, winding through the scrub forest below. Within minutes, the riders came into view. 12 soldiers in blue uniforms, riding in formation, led by a lieutenant Mason didn't recognize. They were headed east toward Fort Apache. "Reinforcements," or Mason had murmured. "Hargrove's request to Forrester must have been approved." Kira's expression hardened. "Then we have less time than we thought. If Forrester has already committed troops, he might not know the full story," Mason pointed out. "Hargrove could have painted this as a straightforward security operation against hostile Apache. Military commanders tend to err on the side of caution." "Caution," Kira repeated bitterly. "Is that what they call it when they slaughter women and children?" Mason had no answer for that. They watched in silence as the patrol passed out of sight, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading. "We need to move," Kira said, turning back to their small camp. "Take a different route. Those soldiers will have cleared the main trail of any threats, but they'll also alert any patrols from Fort Apache to be on the lookout." Mason agreed. They broke camp quickly, erasing all signs of their presence. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving, taking a game trail that paralleled the main road but kept to higher ground, where the juniper and pinyon provided better cover. The day grew hot as they rode, the sun beating down from a cloudless sky. They pushed the horses harder than was wise in the heat, but the encounter with the patrol had added urgency to their journey. If Forrester was already sending troops to support Hargrove, they had precious little time to present their evidence and change his mind. Around midday, they paused to rest the horses near a small seep spring. As the animals drank, Mason scanned their back trail. "No sign of Black Knife," he noted. "He is still there," Kira said with certainty. "Watching, waiting. For what?" "For you to make a mistake." She drank sparingly from their water bag. "Or for me to come to my senses and kill you myself." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Is that likely?" The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. "Not today." It was the closest thing to humor he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face, softening the hard plains into something approaching beauty. As quickly as it appeared, the moment passed, and she was once again the wary, wounded warrior. "We should reach Crow's Pass by nightfall," she said, checking her horse's girth strap. "There is a place there where we can shelter safely." "You know every hiding place in these hills," Mason observed. "I had to. Working between the fort and my people, I needed places where neither soldiers nor suspicious Apache would find me." She mounted her pinto with fluid grace. A woman alone must be careful in this territory. And yet you're riding with me, Ayami, Mason pointed out as he swung onto his own horse. Yes, she acknowledged, her dark eyes meeting his. Strange times make for stranger companions. They rode on, the terrain growing steadily more challenging as they climbed. By late afternoon, they were traversing a narrow ridge that offered spectacular views but little cover. To their right, the land fell away in steep, pine-covered slopes. To their left, barren rock faces rose in weather-sculpted formations that reminded Mason of ancient, watchful giants. Crow's Pass, Kira announced as they rounded a bend and saw a narrow defile cutting through the ridge line ahead. The shelter is on the other side, at the base of the tallest pinnacle. Mason studied the pass with a scout's eye. It was a natural bottleneck, easily defensible, but also a perfect spot for an ambush. Anyone else know about this place? Few living souls, she said. It was a sacred site once, before the white man's god replaced our spirits. They entered the pass single file, the walls of rock closing in on either side. The air was noticeably cooler here, the sun unable to penetrate fully into the narrow canyon. Their horses' hooves made hollow sounds on the stone floor, echoing slightly. Mason felt a prickling along his spine, an instinctive warning that had saved his life more than once in his scouting days. He scanned the pass ahead, seeing nothing but shadows and stone, yet the feeling persisted. Kira, he began, his voice low. I think the crack of a rifle shot cut him off, the sound deafening in the confined space. Mason's horse reared in panic, nearly unseating him. Kira's mount bolted forward, carrying her deeper into the pass. Ambush! Mason shouted, fighting to control his frightened horse while simultaneously searching for the shooter. The shot had come from above, from one of the rock outcroppings that crowned the pass walls. Another shot rang out, the bullet striking stone inches from Mason's head, sending chips flying. He wheeled his horse, seeking cover behind a large boulder. Kira had disappeared around a bend in the pass, her horse in full flight. 3 more shots in rapid succession, all missing, but coming closer. Mason drew his rifle from its scabbard, calculating angles, trying to pinpoint the shooter's location. There, a flash of movement on the western rim, perhaps 100 yards ahead. He raised his rifle and fired, not aiming to hit, but to force the shooter to take cover. Using the momentary respite, he urged his horse forward, staying close to the pass wall where the angle would make it harder for the rifleman to target him. As he rounded the bend, he saw Kira. She had regained control of her horse and taken cover in a small alcove in the rock wall. Her face was tense but composed, her own rifle ready in her hands. How many? She asked as he reached her position. At least one on the western rim, Mason replied, dismounting and pulling his horse into the relative safety of the alcove. Could be more. Hard to tell with the echoes. Not Black Knife, Kira said with certainty. He would use a bow, not a rifle. Army? She shook her head. They would have called for surrender first, and they would not miss so many shots. Bounty hunters then, or hired guns. Mason checked his rifle, counting his remaining ammunition. Hargrove must have put a price on your head. The shooting had stopped, the pass falling into an eerie silence broken only by the nervous shuffling of their horses and the whisper of wind through the rocks. Mason strained his ears, trying to detect any sound of movement, any hint of their attackers' positions or numbers. We're pinned down, he muttered. They have the high ground and can watch both ends of the pass. There is another way, Kira said. Behind us, about 50 yards back. A fissure in the eastern wall, barely wide enough for a person. It leads to a path that climbs to the rim. Mason glanced back the way they had come. You're sure? I told you I know these hills. She looked up at the sky where the sun was beginning to dip toward the western horizon. We have perhaps 2 hours of light left. If we can reach the rim before dark, we can outflank them. And the horses? We must leave them. Her expression was regretful but determined. They will only slow us and make us easier targets. Mason considered their options, which were few. Stay and fight against unknown numbers with the disadvantage of position. Try to break through the pass and almost certainly be shot. Or follow Kira's plan, which meant abandoning their mounts and supplies, but offered at least a chance of survival. The fissure, he decided, but we'll need to create a distraction to reach it without being seen. Kira nodded, already thinking along the same lines. She rummaged in her saddlebag and produced a small bundle, the herbs Wayfinder had given her that morning. This will help. She gathered dry grass and twigs from the alcove floor, forming a small pile near the entrance. Crumbling some of the herbs over it, she struck a spark from her flint. The mixture caught immediately, giving off a thick, gray-white smoke that billowed out into the pass, far more smoke than such a small fire should produce. Spirit smoke, she explained, gathering her rifle in a small bag of essentials. It will cling to the ground and fill the pass. The wind will carry it toward our enemies. Mason quickly did the same, taking only what was absolutely necessary: ammunition, water, the map. Ready? Kira nodded, her face set in determined lines. Stay close to the eastern wall. Move quickly but quietly. They slipped out of the alcove and into the thickening smoke, keeping low and close to the rock face. The smoke had an acrid, medicinal smell that made Mason's eyes water, but it provided excellent cover, obscuring them from any watchers above. They moved carefully back the way they had come, Kira leading with confident steps despite the limited visibility. The smoke seemed to be spreading, filling the pass from wall to wall and drifting upward. From above, it would look like a forest fire had started in the canyon. Here, Kira whispered, stopping beside what appeared to be a solid rock face. Only when Mason looked closer did he see the narrow fissure, a vertical crack barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Kira went first, slipping sideways into the crevice and disappearing from view. Mason followed, finding himself in a tight, winding passage through the rock. It was cool and dark inside, the walls rough against his shoulders as he edged forward. After about 20 feet, the passage widened slightly and began to slope upward. Ahead, he could see Kira moving with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had traveled this route before. The climb was steep and demanding. Several times they had to pull themselves up near vertical sections, using roots and rock protrusions as handholds. Mason's muscles burned with the effort, and his old shoulder wound, a souvenir from an Apache arrow years ago, began to ache fiercely. Finally, they emerged onto a narrow ledge high on the canyon wall. From here, a switchback trail led to the rim. The sun was lower now, painting the western sky in shades of orange and gold. Below, the pass was filled with the drifting smoke from Kira's fire, obscuring everything. No shots, Mason noted. They must think we're still down there, pinned down by the smoke. It will not last much longer, Kira said. We must reach the rim before it clears. They climbed the switchback trail as quickly as caution allowed, aware that any dislodged stone could alert their ambushers. As they neared the top, Mason motioned for Kira to stay back while he crawled the final few feet to peer over the edge. The rim was empty, at least in their immediate vicinity. About 100 yards to the west, he could make out a figure crouched behind a rock formation, rifle trained on the pass below. Just one man, as far as he could tell. Mason signaled to Kira, indicating the shooter's position. She nodded, drawing her knife. They moved silently along the rim, using the scattered boulders for cover, circling behind their attacker. The man was focused intently on the pass, waiting for the smoke to clear. He wore range clothes, a buckskin jacket, worn denim pants, dusty boots, and had the weathered look of a frontier drifter. A hired gun, most likely, not a soldier or settler. Mason and Kira were within 20 feet of him when a small stone rolled under Mason's boot, making a faint sound. The man tensed, starting to turn. Mason surged forward, closing the distance in 3 long strides. The gunman tried to swing his rifle around, but Mason was too close, too fast. He slammed into the man, driving him back against the rock, his forearm pressed against the gunman's throat. "How many more of you?" Mason demanded. The man's eyes darted past Mason, widening at the sight of Kira approaching with her knife drawn. "Just me and Vance," he gasped, "across the pass." "Who sent you?" "Don't know his name. Army captain, paid gold for the Apache woman." His eyes fixed on Kira with a mixture of fear and avarice. "Said she was a spy worth $50, dead or alive." "Hargrove," Kira said, her voice cold. Mason increased the pressure on the man's throat. "How did you know we'd come this way?" "Followed your trail from the shepherd's hut," the gunman wheezed. "Figured you were heading for Fort Apache. This pass is the quickest route." Mason glanced at Kira, whose expression had gone hard as stone. They couldn't let the bounty hunter go. He would only come after them again or alert others. But cold-blooded killing wasn't something Mason had the stomach for. Not anymore. Before he could decide on a course of action, a shot cracked from across the canyon. The bounty hunter's body jerked as the bullet struck him in the chest, his eyes going wide with shock before glazing over in death. Mason spun, pulling Kira down behind the rocks as a second shot whined past them. Vance, the partner, was firing from the opposite rim. Black knife, Kira said, her eyes searching the darkening eastern rim. He has made the decision for us. Mason followed her gaze and caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow slipping between boulders on the far side of the canyon. The young Apache warrior had indeed followed them, and had now taken a hand in their fight. Another shot from Vance's position kicked up dust near their cover. Mason raised his rifle, searching for a target, but the fading light and distance made accuracy difficult. A strange, ululating cry echoed across the canyon, a traditional Apache war cry that raised the hair on the back of Mason's neck. It was answered by the crack of Vance's rifle, firing at this new threat. Black Knife is drawing his fire, Kira said, giving us a chance to escape. Mason knew she was right. This was their opportunity to slip away, while Vance was distracted by the more immediate threat of the Apache warrior. Yet something in him resisted leaving Black Knife to face the bounty hunter alone. He is a warrior, Kira said, reading his hesitation. This is his choice, and he would not thank you for your help. She was right again. Reluctantly, Mason nodded, and they began moving eastward along the rim, keeping low and using the growing darkness as cover. Behind them, the sporadic exchange of fire continued. Vance's rifle and, occasionally, the softer sound of Black Knife's bow. Night had fallen completely by the time they deemed it safe to stop. They had traveled several miles along the canyon rim, far enough that the sounds of fighting had long since faded. They made a cold camp in a hollow protected by stunted junipers, neither of them willing to risk a fire that might attract attention. "Will he be all right?" Mason asked as they shared the meager rations they had carried. Black Knife. Kira's face was unreadable in the darkness. "He is skilled and knows this territory better than any bounty hunter. I believe he will survive." She paused. "Does it matter to you?" "He saved our lives," Mason pointed out, "even though he hates me." "He did not do it for you," Kira said. "He did it for me and for our people. The bounty hunters were a threat to all Apache." Mason accepted this with a nod. Of course, Black Knife's actions hadn't been for his benefit. Yet the young warrior could have let the bounty hunters kill them both and solve several problems at once, from his perspective. "What now?" he asked. "We've lost the horses, most of our supplies. We're on foot in rough country with at least one armed man hunting us." "We continue to Fort Apache," Kira said firmly. "We are less than 2 days' journey now, even on foot. And we still have what matters most." She touched the pouch containing the map. "This is worth any hardship." Mason studied her in the faint starlight. Despite everything, the ambush, the desperate escape, the loss of their horses, her determination remained unshaken. She had a core of steel, this woman, forged in loss and betrayal, but never broken. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch." Kira hesitated, then nodded, settling onto the hard ground and wrapping herself in her blanket. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep, a testament to her exhaustion. Mason leaned back against a juniper trunk, rifle across his knees, and prepared for a long night. His thoughts drifted to the strange path that had led him here, from army scout to hermit to unlikely protector of an Apache woman with a dangerous secret. Nothing about it made sense by the standards of the frontier, where lines between white and native, friend and enemy, were supposed to be clearly drawn. Yet here they were, those lines blurred beyond recognition. And stranger still, it felt right in a way that his former life never had. For all the danger, for all the uncertainty that lay ahead, Mason realized he would not trade places with his former self. That man had been respected, well-paid, secure in his position, and utterly lost in ways he hadn't even recognized. The moon rose, casting silver light across the rocky landscape. In the distance, an owl called, its hollow voice echoing among the cliffs. Mason felt his eyelids growing heavy despite his determination to stay alert. The events of the day had drained him more than he'd realized. He was drifting, not quite asleep but no longer fully aware, when something pulled him back to full consciousness. Not a sound, not a movement, but a presence. He opened his eyes to find the little girl from his dreams standing before him, as real and solid as the rocks around them. She wore a simple deerskin dress, her hair in two neat braids, her feet bare despite the rough ground. Her eyes, dark and solemn, held his with an intensity that froze the breath in his lungs. Shiaz, she said again, her voice as clear as a mountain stream. My child. Mason tried to speak but could produce no sound. The girl raised her small hand, pointing eastward as she had in his dreams. But this time she added something new. She beckoned, urging him to follow. What do you want? Mason finally managed to whisper. What are you trying to show me? The girl's expression turned sad, her eyes filling with a grief too ancient and deep for her young face. Nihul Chi, she said. Then she turned and walked away, her small form gradually fading into the moonlight until she vanished completely. Mason sat perfectly still, heart hammering in his chest. Had he dreamed it? Was his guilt finally driving him to madness? Or had he truly seen a spirit, a messenger from beyond the veil between worlds? You saw her. Kira's voice made him start. She was sitting up, fully awake, her eyes fixed on the spot where the girl had stood. You saw her too? Mason asked, his voice hoarse. Kira nodded slowly. The child from White Rock. She walks between worlds now. She spoke to me, said, Nihulchi. What does it mean? It means they are coming, Kira translated, her face grave. A warning. Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Who is coming? More bounty hunters? Perhaps. Kira's eyes were troubled. Or something worse. You know more than you're telling me, Mason said, suddenly certain. About the girl. About why she appears to me. Kira looked away, her profile sharp against the moonlit sky. There are things I cannot speak of yet. Things you must discover for yourself. She turned back to him, her expression softening slightly. But I can tell you this. She does not come for vengeance. She comes to guide. Guide me to what? To redemption, perhaps. Or truth. Kira reached out and in a gesture that surprised him with its gentleness, touched his hand. The spirits do not waste their efforts on those beyond saving, Mason Caldwell. Remember that in the days ahead. The touch of her fingers, warm against his skin, anchored him in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if, in that simple contact, she had acknowledged something between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. A recognition of shared pain and common purpose that transcended the bloody history that separated their peoples. You should sleep now, she said, withdrawing her hand. I will watch. Dawn is not far off, and tomorrow will demand all our strength. Mason wanted to protest, to press for more answers, but he recognized the finality in her tone. Some truths could not be rushed or demanded. They had to be earned, revealed in their own time. He settled back, rifle still within reach, and closed his eyes. This time, sleep came quickly, deep and dreamless, as if the appearance of the spirit child had cleared something within him, some blockage of guilt or fear that had prevented true rest. When he woke, the eastern sky was lightening to pearl gray, the first hint of dawn touching the highest peaks with gold. Kira was already awake, her blanket rolled and tied, checking the meager supplies they had salvaged. We should reach Three Crow Mesa by midday, she said, handing him a piece of pemmican. From there we can see Fort Apache in the valley beyond, but it is open country, little cover if we are spotted. Mason accepted the food, studying her face in the growing light. She looked tired but resolute, her mind clearly focused on the journey ahead. Whatever connection they had shared in the night seemed, if not forgotten, then set aside for more pressing concerns. What's our plan when we reach the fort? He asked. We can't just walk up to the gate. You're a wanted woman, and I'm not exactly welcome in military circles these days. There is a chaplain at the fort, Father Thomas. He was kind to me when I worked there as a translator. He has a small church just outside the fort walls where he ministers to both soldiers and nearby settlers. If we can reach him, he might help us arrange a meeting with Colonel Forrester. And if he doesn't, or can't, Kira's expression hardened. Then we find another way. The colonel must see this map before he commits troops to Hargrove's massacre. Whatever the risk. Mason nodded, understanding her determination. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now. The fort and Colonel Forrester represented their best, perhaps only chance to prevent another White Rock. They set out as the sun cleared the eastern hills, moving at a steady pace through increasingly forested terrain. The higher elevation brought welcome coolness after the desert heat, as well as greater cover from prying eyes. Pine and spruce replaced the scrub juniper of the lower slopes, their sharp scent filling the air. As they walked, Mason found himself watching Kira with growing curiosity and respect. Despite her injured leg, which must still pain her, she moved with fluid grace, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of threat or opportunity. She was both warrior and diplomat, fierce and contemplative by turns, a study in contradictions that somehow formed a harmonious whole. "You're staring," she observed without looking at him. Mason smiled faintly, caught, "Trying to figure you out. And have you succeeded?" "Not even close." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good. A woman should keep her mysteries." They traveled in comfortable silence after that, saving their breath for the steep trail. By mid-morning, they had climbed high enough to see the lay of the land spreading out below them, the canyon they had traversed, the rolling forests, and in the far distance, the flat-topped formation that must be Three Crow Mesa. As they paused to drink from a clear mountain stream, Kira suddenly tensed, her head lifting like a deer scenting danger. Mason froze, following her gaze to a stand of pines 100 yards ahead. "What is it?" he whispered. "Movement," she replied softly. "Someone is watching the trail." Mason studied the trees, seeing nothing but shadow and dappled sunlight, but he had learned to trust Kira's instincts. "Bounty hunter?" "Or Apache," she said. "This is border territory. My people sometimes send scouts this far to watch the fort." They crouched in the shelter of a fallen log, considering their options. The trail ahead was the most direct route to Three Crow Mesa, and beyond it, Fort Apache. Going around would cost them precious hours and force them into more exposed terrain. "I'll go first," Mason decided. "If it's the bounty hunter, better he targets me than you." Kira's eyes flashed. "I am not helpless." "Never said you were, but you're the one carrying the map. If something happens to me, you can still complete the mission." She studied him, weighing his logic. "Very well, but be careful. I have not brought you this far to lose you now." The words held more concern than she had shown before. And it caught him off guard. Before he could respond, she had moved away, taking cover behind a large boulder from which she could provide covering fire if needed. Mason checked his rifle, then began moving forward, staying low and using the scattered trees for cover. His old scouting instincts took over, his footfalls becoming silent, his movements deliberate and measured. Each step brought him closer to the suspicious stand of pines, his senses stretched to their limit for any sign of threat. He was within 50 yards when he caught a glimpse of buckskin amid the green, someone crouching on a low branch, partially hidden by the trunk. The position was perfect for watching the trail without being seen. Mason froze, evaluating. The figure wasn't moving, seemed unaware of his approach. He could retreat, find another route. Or he could continue, attempt to surprise whoever was watching the trail. The decision was made for him when a twig snapped behind him, Kira moving up to provide support. The sound was tiny, but in the forest stillness, it carried. The figure in the tree tensed, then dropped to the ground with fluid grace. Not a bounty hunter. The movement was too controlled, too quiet. An Apache scout, then. Mason had a split second to decide. Raise his rifle and risk killing one of Kira's people, or hold his fire and risk being killed himself. He chose the latter, standing slowly with his hands away from his weapon. "We mean no harm," he called in halting Apache. "Do da deal ye da." The scout emerged from the trees, a young man, perhaps 20, with the lean build and watchful eyes of a lifetime hunter. He held a bow, arrow nocked but not drawn, pointed at the ground. His gaze flicked from Mason to the trees behind, where Kira had now revealed herself. Recognition flickered in the scout's eyes. "Bike Yati?" he called, using what must be Kira's Apache name. "Oh," Kira replied, stepping forward. Yes, a rapid exchange followed, too quick for Mason to follow with his limited Apache. The scout's manner remained wary, his bow never far from ready, but the immediate tension had eased. "This is Whitehawk," Kira explained to Mason. "He is from my father's band. Wayfinder sent scouts to watch the trails after we left, in case Hargrove moved sooner than expected." Has he? Mason asked, concerned. Kira posed the question to Whitehawk, who responded with a grim nod and more rapid Apache. Soldiers left the fort at dawn, Kira translated, her face tightening. A full company, heavily armed, with supply wagons. They are taking the northern trail toward our people's camp. Forrester has committed the troops, Mason realized, his heart sinking. We're too late. Not yet, Kira insisted. The northern trail is longer. The soldiers will not reach our people before tomorrow. If we can get to Forrester today, show him the map. We'd have to reach the fort by nightfall, Mason calculated. On foot, with at least one bounty hunter still out there. Whitehawk spoke again, gesturing toward the east. He says there are horses, Kira translated. 2 Apache scouts watch the fort from Three Crow Mesa. They have horses we can use. A spark of hope rekindled. With horses, they could reach the fort by evening, possibly in time to convince Forrester to recall his troops before they engaged Kira's people. Tell him we accept, Mason said, and thank him. Kira conveyed the message. Whitehawk nodded once, then turned and melted back into the forest, gesturing for them to follow. As they moved through the trees, Mason found himself thinking about the spirit child's warning. Ni Wul Chi. They are coming. Had she been warning about the soldiers? Or something else? Something they had yet to encounter? Either way, the race was now truly on, not just for their own lives, but for the lives of Kira's people. And for the first time, Mason allowed himself to consider what might happen if they failed. Another White Rock. More innocent blood. More ghosts to haunt his dreams. No, he thought with sudden, fierce determination. Not again. Not while he still drew breath. Whatever it took, whatever price he had to pay personally, he would not allow history to repeat itself. This time, he would stand on the right side. Not out of guilt, not for redemption, but because it was the right thing to do. Beside him, Kira moved with renewed purpose, her face set in determined lines. In that moment, watching her profile against the forest shadows, Mason realized something that perhaps should have been obvious from the beginning. They were no longer reluctant allies of circumstance. Somewhere along this journey, through shared danger and gradually built trust, they had become something more. Partners, bound by common purpose and growing respect. And that, more than anything, gave him hope that they might yet succeed where all logic said they should fail. Three Crow Mesa loomed against the afternoon sky, a massive flat-topped formation crowned by 3 distinctive spires that gave it its name. From its summit, Fort Apache was clearly visible in the valley below, a collection of whitewashed buildings surrounded by wooden walls, the American flag snapping in the breeze above the command post. Mason and Kira crouched beside the 2 Apache scouts Whitehawk had led them to, studying the fort through a brass spyglass one of the scouts had acquired in trade. The fort's main gate stood open, soldiers moving about their duties in the yard beyond. Supply wagons were being loaded, preparations for reinforcing the troops that had already departed for Kira's people. We're running out of time, Mason said, lowering the spyglass. Those supply wagons will leave within hours. Kira nodded, her face drawn with tension. And if they reach the main force before we can convince Forrester to recall his troops? She didn't need to finish the thought. They all knew what would happen. Another massacre, another White Rock, another generation of hatred sown in blood-soaked ground. The older of the 2 scouts, a weathered man named Silent Walker, spoke in rapid Apache. Kira listened intently, then translated for Mason. He says Father Thomas will be at his church now. The white soldiers attend services before departing on campaigns. Perfect, Mason said. That gives us a way to approach without going through the main gate. He studied the small wooden church that stood a quarter-mile from the fort walls, positioned to serve both the military and nearby settlers. Can your men get us closer without being seen? Silent Walker nodded, pointing to a dry creek bed that wound down from the mesa, passing within 100 yards of the church. It would provide cover most of the way. The horses the scouts had provided were small but hardy Apache ponies, sure-footed on the rocky trails. Within minutes, they were descending the mesa, keeping to the deepest shadows as they made their way toward the creek bed. What do we know about this Father Thomas? Mason asked as they rode. Can he be trusted? He is unusual for a black robe, Kira replied. He speaks our language, respects our ways, even while trying to convert us. When I worked at the fort, he defended me against those who saw only my Apache blood. She paused. If any white man at Fort Apache will help us, it is him. Mason nodded, hoping her assessment was correct. They were betting everything on this priest's compassion and sense of justice. The creek bed provided excellent cover, its banks high enough to conceal them from casual observation. They dismounted at the point closest to the church, leaving the horses with Silent Walker, while the younger scout moved ahead to ensure the path was clear. When he returned, he spoke urgently to Kira, whose expression tightened. "What is it?" Mason asked. "Two men watching the church," she translated. "Watch soldiers, rough-looking, armed. One matches the description of Vance, the bounty hunter who escaped." Mason cursed under his breath. Hargrove must have warned him we might try to contact the fort. He's covering all approaches. "We cannot risk a confrontation so close to the fort," Kira said. "The sound of gunfire would bring soldiers immediately." Mason considered their options. None of them good. They couldn't approach the church with bounty hunters watching. They couldn't enter the fort directly. And every passing minute brought Hargrove's forces closer to Kira's people. "We need a distraction," he decided. "Something to draw the bounty hunters away from the church long enough for us to get inside." Silent Walker spoke again, gesturing toward the fort. Kira's eyes widened slightly at his suggestion. "He offers to create a distraction," she said. "He will be seen near the fort wall, draw pursuit, then escape into the hills." "It's too dangerous," Mason objected. "If they catch him, they will not catch him," Kira said with absolute confidence. "In these hills, no white man can catch Silent Walker unless he wishes to be caught." The older scout's face creased in what might have been a smile, his dark eyes gleaming with pride at her assessment. He said something else, which Kira didn't translate, but Mason caught the word White Rock and understood. This was personal for Silent Walker too. Another debt to be paid, another chance for justice. "Tell him we accept his help," Mason said, "but only if he's certain he can escape." After Kira translated, the scout nodded once, checked his bow, then slipped away through the underbrush with the silent grace of a hunting cat. "We wait," Kira said, settling into stillness beside Mason. They didn't wait long. 10 minutes later, shouts erupted from the direction of the fort. Mason peered cautiously over the creek bank to see soldiers running toward the western wall, where a figure, Silent Walker, was clearly visible on a ridge, bow raised defiantly. The two bounty hunters abandoned their watch on the church, drawn by the commotion and the prospect of earning the bounties on any Apache warrior. The moment they were out of sight, Mason and Kira moved, crossing the open ground to the church with swift, purposeful strides. The small wooden building was empty except for a single figure kneeling before the altar, a thin man in a black cassock, his head bowed in prayer. At their entrance, he rose and turned, revealing a face that was young but weathered by sun and hardship, with kind eyes that widened in shock at the sight of them. "Kira?" he said, using her Christian name. "My God, they said you were—" He broke off, registering Mason's presence in their disheveled, urgent state. "Father Thomas," Kira said, stepping forward. "We need your help. Many lives depend on it." The priest glanced toward the windows, where the sounds of pursuit could still be heard, then made a swift decision. "This way," he said, leading them to a small door at the rear of the church. It opened onto a sparsely furnished room, his quarters, evidently. "Quickly, before someone comes." Once inside, with the door closed behind them, Father Thomas turned to Kira. "They're saying you're a spy, that you've betrayed the army. Captain Hargrove has a price on your head." "It is Hargrove who has betrayed his oath," Kira replied. "He plans to massacre my people for profit, as he did at White Rock Canyon." "White Rock?" The priest looked confused, then turned to Mason. "And you are—" "Mason Caldwell, former Army scout." Mason met the priest's gaze directly. "I was at White Rock. I provided the intelligence that led to the attack, not knowing Hargrove's true intentions. I won't let it happen again." Understanding dawned in Father Thomas's eyes. "The troops that left this morning are heading for my father's band," Kira confirmed, "under the pretext of putting down a hostile force. But we have proof of Hargrove's real motives." She withdrew the map from its pouch, carefully unfolding it on the priest's small table. This is why he wants my people removed or eliminated. Mineral deposits on treaty-protected land. Father Thomas studied the map, his expression growing grave. This changes everything. But Colonel Forrester has already dispatched the troops. Hargrove convinced him your people were planning attacks on settlements. Then we must convince him otherwise, Mason said. Can you arrange a meeting? Get us into the fort? The priest hesitated, weighing the risk. Forrester is a hard man, but an honest one. If he sees this evidence, he straightened with sudden decision. I'll go to him now. Tell him I have vital information that changes the nature of the mission. He trusts me enough to hear me out. We don't have much time, Kira urged. The troops march as we speak. Wait here, Father Thomas said. Keep the doors locked. I'll return as soon as I can. After the priest left, Mason moved to the window, keeping watch through a gap in the simple curtains. The commotion had died down. Silent Walker had evidently led his pursuers on a merry chase before disappearing into the hills. Do you think Forrester will listen? He asked. Kira had seated herself at the table, her fingers resting lightly on the map. I don't know. He is a military man first, with a soldier's loyalty to his own kind. But he has a reputation for fairness. She looked up at Mason. What would you have done if you had been shown this map before White Rock? The question caught him off guard with its directness. I'd like to think I would have refused the mission, he said after a moment. But the truth is I was a different man then. Loyal to the army, believing in the cause. I might not have understood the implications, or might have rationalized them away. And now? Mason turned from the window to face her. Now I know better. Now I understand that what looks like progress to one people means destruction to another. That there are costs too high to justify any profit. Kira nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. They lapsed into silence, the minutes stretching painfully as they waited for Father Thomas's return. When the door finally opened, it wasn't the priest who entered, but a tall, broad-shouldered man in a colonel's uniform. His face was deeply lined, his mustache iron gray, his eyes sharp with intelligence and caution. Behind him came Father Thomas, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Colonel Forrester, the priest said, this is Kira, formerly a translator at this fort, and Mason Caldwell, former Army scout. Forrester surveyed them both, his eyes cold and calculating. I should arrest you both on the spot, he said, his voice hard. One accused spy and one deserter, bringing wild accusations against a decorated officer under my command. Not wild accusations, Colonel, Kira said, meeting his gaze steadily. Truth that has been buried for too long. Truth? Forrester's eyebrow arched skeptically. Captain Hargrove has served with distinction for years. His record speaks for itself. So did mine once, Mason said quietly. Records can lie, Colonel, or tell only part of the story. Forrester's jaw tightened. He studied the map for a long moment, his expression giving nothing away. Father Thomas shifted nervously but remained silent. Do you know how many accusations I've heard against officers during my career? Forrester finally asked. Dozens, most from people with grievances, vendettas, or simple misunderstandings of military necessity. He traced the boundary lines on the map with one finger. Yet I must admit, there has been a pattern with Hargrove. Operations that seemed excessive, civilian casualties dismissed too easily, and always somehow economic interests that benefited shortly after. He looked up, his eyes sharper now. I've had questions for some time, but never enough evidence to act. What exactly are you claiming happened at White Rock Canyon? This shift in tone gave Mason hope. He explained what he knew, the intelligence he'd provided, his concerns about civilians, Hargrove's dismissal of those concerns, and the massacre that followed. And now he plans to repeat this atrocity, Kira added. My father's band is small, mostly women, children, and elders. They pose no threat except to Hargrove and Blackwood's mining interests. Forrester straightened, his military bearing evident as he made a decision. I need more than a map and your word to recall troops already in the field, he said, but his tone had changed. However, there is something you should know. I've been quietly investigating Hargrove's financial dealings for several weeks. There are irregularities that have troubled me. He turned to Father Thomas. Fetch Lieutenant Davis. Tell him to bring the Fort Benton correspondence. As the priest hurried out, Forrester continued, "If what you're saying aligns with what I've already discovered, it may be enough to act. But understand this, if you're lying to me, I'll have you both in chains before sunset." Mason and Kira exchanged glances. For the first time, they had found an ally where they least expected one, but an ally still needing to be convinced. "We understand, Colonel," Mason said, "and we're prepared to—" A commotion outside interrupted him, shouting the thud of boots on wooden steps. The door burst open to reveal Captain Hargrove, flanked by two soldiers with rifles raised. "Significant relevance, I should think," Forrester interrupted, "especially in light of reports I received this morning from Fort Benton, detailing unusual financial transactions between your accounts and those of a certain Boston investment group headed by Mr. Blackwood." Hargrove's face paled. "What reports? I demand to see—" "You demand nothing, Captain," Forrester cut in, his voice hardening to steel. "I've had suspicions about your operations for months. Too many hostile bands that turned out to be family groups. Too many necessary actions that seemed to benefit mining and railroad interests. I ordered an investigation 3 weeks ago." Mason glanced at Kira, seeing his own surprise mirrored in her eyes. Forrester had been suspicious of Hargrove before they ever arrived. "Lies," Hargrove hissed, but his confidence was cracking. "Colonel, these people have deceived you. The Apache woman is a known spy, and Caldwell is a disgraced scout with a personal vendetta against me." "Against you?" Mason stepped forward. "I didn't even know you were involved until I found Kira and heard her story. This isn't personal, Hargrove. It's about preventing another massacre." "White Rock was a legitimate military action," Hargrove snapped, his control slipping. "Those savages were—" He stopped abruptly, realizing his error. "Were what, Captain?" Forrester asked quietly. "I don't recall mentioning White Rock Canyon in any of our discussions about Apache threats." Hargrove's hand moved to his sidearm, desperation replacing calculation. "This is absurd. I won't stand here and—" "You'll stand exactly where you are, Captain," Forrester commanded, his own hand now resting on his pistol. "Sergeant Mills, disarm Captain Hargrove and place him under arrest pending investigation of corruption and conspiracy charges." The two soldiers flanking Hargrove exchanged uncertain glances. For a terrible moment, Mason thought they might side with their captain. Then the older of the two, Sergeant Mills presumably, stepped forward. "Yes, sir," he said, holding out his hand for Hargrove's weapon. With a snarl of rage, Hargrove drew his pistol, not to surrender it, but to aim at Kira. "You Apache bitch," he spat. "This is your doing." Mason moved without thinking, throwing himself between Kira and the gun. The shot cracked through the small room, deafeningly loud. Mason felt the impact, a hammer blow to his left shoulder that spun him halfway around. He heard Kira cry out, saw the second soldier tackle Hargrove, driving him to the floor. Then he was on his knees, warm blood soaking through his shirt, Kira's arms supporting him. "Mason!" Her voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mason, stay with me!" He tried to speak, to tell her he was all right, but the words wouldn't form. The room was spinning, darkening at the edges. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Kira's face above him, her dark eyes wide with an emotion he'd never seen there before. Not anger, not determination, but fear, fear for him. He dreamed of the dead. They came to him as they always did, silent and accusing. But this time something was different. Instead of surrounding him, they stood apart, creating a pathway through their midst. At the end of this path stood the little girl, solemn-eyed as ever, but now holding something in her small hands, a curved piece of bone or shell that gleamed softly in the dreamlight. "Shiaz," she said again. "My child." Mason tried to speak, to ask what she wanted, why she had haunted him all these years. But dream logic held him mute, capable only of watching, listening. The girl approached, her bare feet making no sound on the misty ground. When she stood directly before him, she held out the bone fragment, offering it to him with grave ceremony. "Hosho nahasli'i," she said, "beauty is restored." As Mason reached for the fragment, the dream began to dissolve, the figures of the dead fading like morning mist, the little girl's solemn face the last to disappear. He woke to pain and the smell of medicine, a pungent mixture of familiar antiseptic and unfamiliar herbs. For a moment, he couldn't place where he was. Not his cabin, not the desert. Then memory returned. The church, Hargrove, the gunshot. He was in a bed, sunlight streaming through a window with simple curtains. As his vision cleared, he recognized the room. Father Thomas's quarters behind the church. Though it had been rearranged to accommodate his recovery, he tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through his left shoulder. "Be still," said a voice beside him. Kira, seated in a wooden chair next to the bed, her face drawn with exhaustion. "The bullet passed through, but you lost much blood. The fever has only just broken." Mason settled back, grimacing at the throbbing pain. His mouth felt dry as sand. "How long?" he managed to rasp. "2 weeks," Kira replied, offering him water. "You've been drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctor wasn't certain you would survive." "2 weeks," he whispered, his voice weak from disuse. He accepted the water gratefully. "The troops? Your people." "Safe," Kira assured him, placing a gentle hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Colonel Forrester sent riders with the orders to halt the operation. They reached the main force before they engaged my people." Relief washed through him, so profound it momentarily eclipsed the pain. "And Hargrove?" "Under arrest, along with his civilian partner Blackwood, who was found at a nearby camp. Forrester has sent all evidence to his superiors in Washington." A small, grim smile touched her lips. It seems the colonel had been building a case against Hargrove for some time. Our arrival with the map was the final piece he needed. Mason's gaze moved to a collection of small pouches and clay pots on a nearby table. "Those herbs, they smell like—" "Apache medicine," Kira confirmed. "My father sent them with Black Knife when he heard what happened." "Black Knife?" Mason's surprise was evident. "He helped heal me?" Kira nodded. "He arrived a week ago. Said he had been watching from the hills and saw everything. He has been helping gather the herbs needed for your recovery." She paused. "He said a warrior deserves to die standing, not from a coward's bullet." Mason let out a weak laugh that turned into a wince. High praise coming from him. "He sits outside most nights. Says he's keeping watch, but I think he's curious about you. About why I—" She stopped herself. "Why you what?" Mason asked. Kira's eyes met his. "Why I have not left your side." Mason processed this, the reality of their success gradually sinking in. They had done it. Against all odds, they had prevented another massacre, had brought Hargrove's crimes to light. Mason nodded, absorbing this information. "What about Black Knife? Did he make it back safely?" A shadow of concern crossed Kira's face. "He returned to my father's camp the day after the ambush. He was wounded, Vance's bullet grazed his shoulder, but he refused treatment, saying it was a mark of honor." Her expression softened slightly. "He was the one who warned my people that the soldiers were coming. Without him, they might not have had time to prepare." "So he helped save them after all," Mason said. "Yes," Kira hesitated. "When he learned what you did here, taking the bullet meant for me, something changed in him. He asked my father why the spirits would guide a white man to protect an Apache. And what did Wayfinder say? That some debts transcend blood." Her eyes met his. "When Forrester's men reached our camp with orders to stand down, it was Black Knife who convinced the younger warriors not to fight. He said that blood calls for blood, but courage calls for respect." Mason looked away, unexpectedly moved. "I never expected that from him." "Nor did he," Kira replied. "He may never call you friend, but he has stopped calling you enemy. Among my people, that is no small thing." Mason understood. In this harsh land, where hatreds ran as deep as the canyons, the absence of enmity was perhaps the closest thing to peace either of them could hope for. "You saved my life," Kira said quietly. "Again." "Seemed only fair," Mason replied, attempting a weak smile. "You saved mine first." Her expression softened, the usual guardedness giving way to something warmer. "We saved each other, I think." A comfortable silence fell between them. Mason found himself studying her face, noting how different she looked in repose, without the constant tension of their journey. Younger somehow, more vulnerable. "I had the dream again," he said after a while. "The little girl. She spoke to me." Kira leaned forward slightly. "What did she say?" Hosho Nahasli, beauty is restored. He looked at Kira questioningly. What does it mean? It is a phrase from our healing ceremonies. It means balance has returned, harmony restored. Kira hesitated, then reached into the pouch at her waist. She showed you this, didn't she? She held out a small, curved fragment, bone or shell. Mason couldn't tell which, but he recognized it instantly as the object from his dream. How did you, he began. Because I have carried it since White Rock, Kira said softly. It belonged to a child who died there, a girl named Little Dove. Understanding dawned slowly, pieces falling into place. The girl in my dreams, you knew her. Kira nodded, her fingers closing protectively around the fragment. She was my sister's daughter, 7 years old when the soldiers came. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes held ancient pain. I was away at the government school. My sister, her husband, their children, all killed. Except I thought for one. One, Mason echoed, a strange suspicion forming. A boy, my nephew, was supposedly with a hunting party during the attack, but he was never found afterward. For years I believed he might have survived, might be alive somewhere. Her gaze met Mason's, intent and searching. The child you saw at White Rock, after the attack, you said she was standing among the... She couldn't finish. Among the dead, Mason supplied gently. A little girl, 2 braids, maybe 7 years old. I went back to look for her, but she was gone. I always hoped she had somehow survived. Not survived, Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not in this world, but her spirit remained, attached to the one who had seen her, who had wanted to save her. The implications stunned Mason into silence. All these years, the child haunting his dreams had been Kira's niece, her spirit somehow drawn to him, following him, eventually guiding him to this moment, this completion of a circle begun in blood at White Rock Canyon. She called me Shiaz, he said, my child. But I'm not, no, Kira agreed. But I believe she was speaking for my sister, her mother. In our Wenye, all children of the band are our children. She recognized something in you, Mason, a chance for redemption, for healing. The idea was both strange and oddly comforting, that the ghost who had haunted him had not been seeking vengeance but restoration, had seen in him not just the scout who had enabled the massacre, but a man capable of making amends. And now, he asked, will she rest? I think so, Kira said. You have balanced the scales. Beauty is restored. She reached out hesitantly, her fingertips just brushing his hand where it lay on the blanket. The touch was light but electrifying, a connection that went beyond words. The door opened, admitting Father Thomas with a tray of food and medicine. He smiled at seeing Mason awake. Our patient returns to the land of the living, I see. Good. Colonel Forrester will be pleased. He set the tray down and checked Mason's bandages with practiced hands. The wound is clean, no infection. You were fortunate. Another inch to the right. Mason nodded, understanding how close he had come to death. Yet strangely, he felt no fear at the thought, only a profound gratitude for the chance to complete what he had begun, to make right what had once gone so terribly wrong. The colonel wishes to speak with you both when you're able, Father Thomas continued. He has propositions to discuss. Mason glanced at Kira, who seemed unsurprised by this news. What kind of propositions? That is for him to explain, the priest said. But I believe it involves potential roles for you both in future relations between the Army and the Apache bands. The idea was so unexpected that Mason could only blink in surprise. Him, working with the Army again? After everything that had happened? Rest now, Father Thomas advised, seeing Mason's confusion. Eat, regain your strength. Decisions can wait. After the priest left, Mason turned to Kira. Did you know about this? Forrester's propositions? He mentioned possibilities, she acknowledged. A need for honest brokers between his command and my people. People who understand both worlds. People caught between, Mason thought. Like Kira, with her mission, school education, and Apache heritage. Like himself, with his scout's knowledge of the land and newly awakened conscience. And what do you think? He asked. Kira was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. I think there has been enough blood, enough death. If there is a chance to build something different, something better, she looked at him directly. But I would not do it alone. The implication was clear. Forrester wanted them both, the translator who had exposed corruption, the scout who had chosen justice over loyalty to his own kind. Together they represented a different path forward, a possibility of understanding where before there had been only suspicion and hatred. We'd be reviled by both sides, Mason pointed out. Too white for the Apache, too Apache for the whites. Yes, Kira agreed, always between, never fully belonging to either world. A small smile touched her lips, but perhaps belonging to each other. The words hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning. Mason studied her face, the proud cheekbones, the intelligent eyes, the strength and vulnerability so carefully balanced, and felt something shift inside him, a recognition of possibility he had never allowed himself to consider. I dreamed of a different life once, he said slowly. A peaceful place, land of my own, no more killing. But dreams change. And people change, Kira added. You are not the man who rode away from White Rock. I am not the girl who returned to find her family massacred. No, Mason agreed. We're not those people anymore. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the small room in shades of gold and amber. Through the window, Mason could see the fort in the distance, the flag being lowered for the day. Beyond it, the endless expanse of mountains and desert, the land that had shaped both their peoples, brought them into conflict, and now perhaps might see them forge a new path together. Whatever Forrester proposes, he said, his decision forming even as he spoke, I'm with you, if you'll have me. Kira's hand found his, her fingers twining with his own in a gesture that needed no translation. I will have you, Mason Caldwell, she said softly, and we will build something new from the ashes of what was destroyed. In that moment, with the last light of day gilding her face and their joined hands warm between them, Mason felt a presence in the room, not fearful, not accusing, but peaceful. The little girl from his dreams, Kira's niece, watching over them with solemn approval. Hojo Nahasli. Beauty is restored. Not an ending, Mason realized, but a beginning. A chance to heal old wounds, to bridge worlds that had too long been separated by blood and misunderstanding. It would not be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But with Kira beside him, her strength complementing his own, he believed it was possible. Outside, darkness fell over the land, stars emerging one by one in the vast desert sky. The same stars that had guided travelers for generations, Apache and white alike. The same stars that would light their path forward into whatever future they would build together. The door opened, admitting Father Thomas with a tray of food and medicine. He smiled at seeing Mason awake. Our patient returns to the land of the living, I see. Good. Colonel Forrester will be pleased. He set the tray down and checked Mason's bandages with practiced hands. The wound is deep, but clean. No infection yet, though you'll need several weeks of rest. He glanced at Kira. She's hardly left your side these past 2 days. Mason nodded, understanding how close he had come to death. Yet strangely, he felt no fear at the thought, only a profound gratitude for the chance to complete what he had begun, to make right what had once gone so terribly wrong. The colonel wishes to speak with you when you are able, Father Thomas continued. But there's no rush. Heal first. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of pain, fever, and gradual healing. Kira was a constant presence, tending his wound with herbs she gathered from the hills, speaking to him of Apache healing traditions. In the quiet hours of his recovery, their conversations deepened, moving beyond the immediate dangers they had faced to the lives they had lived, the losses they had endured. What will you do when this is over? Mason asked her one evening as he sat up for the first time, his back against the wall, watching the sunset through the small window. I don't know, she admitted. For so long, my purpose has been revenge, then survival. She paused, studying his face. And you? Mason looked out at the distant mountains, violet in the fading light. I've been running for 5 years. Maybe it's time to stop. By the time Colonel Forrester finally came to see them, Mason could walk short distances, though his shoulders still pained him. The colonel arrived without ceremony, dressed in a simple uniform without adornments, and pulled up a chair beside Mason's bed. Mr. Caldwell, he said, nodding respectfully, You're looking better. Feeling it, sir, Mason replied. I understand we have you to thank for stopping the troops. You can thank yourselves for bringing me the evidence I needed. Forrester's weathered face was unreadable. Hargrove and Blackwood are facing court-martial and civilian charges. The conspiracy went deeper than I'd imagined, all the way to politicians in Washington with investments in Blackwood's ventures. He turned to Kira. Your father and your people are safe. I've issued orders protecting them from further military action. For how long? Kira asked, her voice skeptical. Until the next officer decides there's profit in our land? Forrester nodded, acknowledging the legitimate concern. That's why I'm here. I have a proposition for you both. He outlined his plan, a formal treaty amendment recognizing Wayfinder's band's right to a specific tract of land, not the mineral-rich area Blackwood had coveted, but fertile ground with water and game. In exchange, Wayfinder would agree to help keep peace with other Apache bands. And where do we fit in? Mason asked. I need liaison officers I can trust, Forrester said directly. People who understand both worlds, who've proven they value truth over profit, justice over expedience. The idea was unexpected. Mason glanced at Kira, whose expression remained carefully neutral. I'll need time to discuss this with my father, she said. Of course. Forrester rose to leave. Take what time you need, but know that this opportunity won't come again soon. He paused at the door. Oh, and you have a visitor. Been waiting outside for 3 days, refused to enter, says his name is Black Knife. After Forrester left, Mason and Kira exchanged surprised looks. Black Knife? Here? Mason said. Kira moved to the window, peering out. Yes, he's sitting under that cottonwood. Ask him to come in. She shook her head. He won't enter a white man's building. We must go to him. With Kira's support, Mason made his way slowly outside. The air was cool and sweet after the confinement of the sick room. Black Knife sat cross-legged in the shade, his face impassive. He did not rise when they approached. You live, he said to Mason, his English halting but clear. Thanks to Kira, Mason replied. And you, Kira added, surprising them both. If you had not followed us, had not dealt with the bounty hunter? Black Knife's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. I did not do it for him. I know, Mason said, but I'm grateful all the same. An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Black Knife spoke again. Wayfinder sent me to hear the White Chief's words, to see if you live or die. He looked at Mason directly, to decide if you are truly different from those who came before. And what will you tell him? Kira asked softly. Black Knife stood, his movements fluid and controlled. I will tell him that the spirits have chosen strangely, that the killer of our people now bleeds for them. He touched the knife at his belt, the weapon that gave him his name. I will tell him that my blade will wait, for now. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't even acceptance, but it was an acknowledgement, a willingness to wait and see. From Black Knife, it was more than Mason had ever expected. In the weeks that followed, as Mason's strength returned, he and Kira rode with a military escort to meet with Wayfinder. The negotiations were tense, complicated by generations of broken promises. But slowly, painfully, agreement took shape. Land boundaries were drawn, rights established, protections guaranteed. Through it all, Mason watched Kira move between worlds with grace and determination, translating not just words but cultural meanings, finding common ground where none seemed possible. And in quiet moments by evening fires, their own relationship deepened from respect to something more, a connection forged in shared purpose and growing affection. When the treaty was finally signed, Wayfinder approached Mason privately. My daughter speaks well of you, the chief said without preamble. She honors me by doing so, Mason replied. She says you see with new eyes, that the ghosts no longer blind you. Wayfinder studied him intently. Is this true? Mason considered the question carefully. The dead will always be with me, he said finally, but now they guide rather than haunt. Wayfinder nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then perhaps you are the bridge the spirits have been building. He gestured toward Kira, who stood talking with some of the younger women, two souls caught between worlds, making a path where none existed. I don't know if I'm worthy of that role, Mason admitted. None of us are worthy of the tasks the spirits give us, Wayfinder said with unexpected humor. We simply do them as best we can. As spring gave way to summer and summer to fall, the new settlement took shape. Forrester kept his word, providing protection and supplies. Wayfinder's people built traditional wickiups alongside more permanent structures, adapting as they had always done. Mason and Kira traveled between the fort and the settlement, resolving disputes, delivering messages, maintaining the fragile peace. And in those journeys, sharing campfires under desert stars, they built something neither had thought possible. Trust that deepened into love, a partnership of equals united by common purpose. 3 months after the signing of the treaty, Mason stood on a ridge overlooking a small valley where a creek ran clear and sweet through groves of cottonwood. Behind him, a dozen Apache families were setting up camp. Wayfinder's band, now officially settled on land the government had finally recognized as theirs by treaty right. 3 months later, Mason stood on a ridge overlooking a small valley where a creek ran clear and sweet through groves of cottonwood. Behind him, a dozen Apache families were setting up camp. Wayfinder's band, now officially settled on land the government had finally recognized as theirs by treaty right. The land wasn't the richest, didn't contain the valuable minerals Blackwood had coveted, but it had water, game, and most importantly, security. Colonel Forrester had personally guaranteed that this settlement would be protected, its boundaries respected. Mason's shoulder still ached in cold weather, a reminder of Hargrove's bullet and how close he had come to death. But on days like today, with the sun warm on his face and the satisfaction of work well done in his heart, the pain seemed a small price to pay. Admiring your handiwork? Kira's voice came from behind him. She moved to stand beside him, her presence as always bringing a sense of rightness, of completion. Our handiwork, he corrected, smiling at her. This wouldn't have happened without you. She acknowledged this with a slight inclination of her head. Nor without you, nor without Forrester's integrity, my father's wisdom, or even Black Knife's reluctant acceptance. Black Knife had indeed eventually accepted Mason's presence among them. Not with friendship, perhaps never with that, but with a grudging recognition that the former scout had proven himself an ally rather than an enemy. Have you had the dream again? Kira asked, her gaze on the valley below where children played in the creek, their laughter carrying on the breeze. No, Mason said, not since that day in the church. I think she's at peace now. Kira nodded, her hand slipping into his with the easy familiarity that had grown between them over the months of working together, advocating for her people, building this new reality from the ashes of the old. And you, she asked, are you at peace, Mason Caldwell? He considered the question, looking out over the valley, the camp, the life they were building. The ghosts of White Rock no longer haunted his dreams. The weight of guilt he had carried for 5 long years had lightened, not vanished completely. He would never forget, but transformed into something constructive, a determination to do better, to be better. Yes, he said finally, I believe I am. Kira's fingers tightened around his, her other hand moving to touch the small, curved fragment she now wore on a cord around her neck. Little Dove's fragment, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been found. Then so am I, she said softly. Together they stood on the ridge between two worlds, their shadows merging in the late afternoon sun, no longer exile and betrayer, but builders of a bridge neither had imagined possible. Behind them, Wayfinder raised his hands in blessing over the new camp. Before them stretched the future, uncertain as always, but facing it together, they found they were not afraid. Beauty indeed was restored,